while we might all have a different heritage, in my case, being Hispanic Latino, we should all also try to have an American identity. I grew up in New Jersey. I graduated from Emerson High School in Union City. I went to North Bergen High School prior to that. And I distinctly remember seeing that my island, when I'm originally from Puerto Rico, was just like a footnote about the Treaty of Paris of 1898, and not really seeing myself reflected, even though most of the students in my classroom looked and sounded like me. We tend to see is that the stories of Latinos are overlooked, our perspectives, our contributions, and if they are included, then it tends to be the same old story of victimhood. Oftentimes, teachers have not majored in courses like Latin American studies or Africana studies, so they may not be aware of the content that is there because they too grew up in a system like I did in New Jersey back in the 90s, where these stories were oftentimes not told. And now that we have seen different organizations and advocates, and in this case, the governor of New Jersey signing this bill, that it is a step in the right direction. And I hope that this is only a beginning step because standards is just that they actually provide the professional development that teachers will need so that they can feel more comfortable teaching this, and that it would eventually also be tested. Because oftentimes, if it's not tested, it may not be taught in the classroom. So how do we really measure the effectiveness of these legislative changes? Teachers might find themselves in a very difficult spot. So I understand that. I personally tend to be risk averse. So what I always like to do is to make sure that I'm always going back to the curriculum itself. So that's one of the things that I really like about what New Jersey is doing. If it's going to be in the state standards, then it is something that we're supposed to teach. The first criterion that I would look at is this historically significant? If the answer is yes, then how can I embed that into my courses to make sure that all of my students are being exposed to this material? For example, if we're talking about the women's suffrage movement, there were plenty of Latina women, right, that were advocating for suffrage, like Nina Otero Warren in New Mexico back in the 1920s. How can I teach about Brown versus Board of Education, which I think we all should, and not cover Mendez versus Westminster? And so you have a Puerto Rican and Mexican American girl whose parents are fighting for the same type of educational opportunity. I want to make sure that they also know about our own version of, Jackie Robinson with Roberto Clemente, who happens to be from the same city in Puerto Rico that I grew up in. I personally wasn't surprised when the data show that there was only 13% of the seminal topics that were actually covered by the textbooks that we examined with Johns Hopkins. But we needed the data, right? We wanted to quantify and see to what extent is their coverage, and not just like, well, I know that this is my experience growing up in the 90s in New Jersey, but can we really quantify that? That's how we were really systematic about finding states that had high Latino populations, like the usual suspects again, California, Florida, Texas, New Mexico, that has the largest, but also all the districts in places like West Virginia and Iowa that do not have a large student population of individuals who identified as Hispanic or Latino, to see what is being covered and what is not being covered. And I would also point out that you don't necessarily have to be a member of that particular group in order to do this. While I might be able to empathize directly, I have my own experiences as a Latino or Hispanic person, that doesn't mean that you have to be someone like me in order to teach this. I would say that instead of one particular individual, it's more of the reaction that I get from students, which is, how could I not have known this? Or how could I have lived going through our educational system, not being aware that, yeah, during the Mexican-American War, maybe there was a Mexican perspective that I could have considered, right? Or how can you talk about the Spanish-American War and Puerto Rico with almost over 3 million inhabitants on the island? It's only a footnote, and we have so many people in the United States that do not know that we were born citizens since 1917. My biggest push is that, history is not something that should be taught, from the left or from the right. History is history, and we lead with the facts and those primary sources. So we really want to have our students to engage in civics, to be part of a healthy democracy. They need to see themselves represented in that curriculum, and like they truly are stakeholders in this society, that we're not something foreign. Yes, Latin American studies or history is interconnected with Latino studies. So there's a nexus there, and we should at least have that for background or for the context. But it's important that the students see themselves in those books.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.